Mr. Chairman, committee members, many people think that the science of climate change is settled. It isn't. And the issue is not whether there has been an overall warming during the past century. There has. Also, it was not uniform, and none was observed during the past decade. The geologic record provides us with abundant evidence for such perpetual natural climate variability, from ice caps reaching the equator to none at all, even at the poles. The climate debate is in reality not about carbon dioxide, but about 1.6 watts per square meter discrepancy, or this kind of uncertainty in a poorly known planetary energy balance. This is an absolute fundamental statement to start with. Okay? So let me explain. Without our atmosphere, the planet would be frozen ice ball. Natural greenhouse warming is warming it up by 33 degrees C. Next, 2/3 of this warming, or more, up to, well, perhaps even 95% of this warming is really due to water vapor, not to CO2. Okay? So water vapor, not carbon dioxide, is by far the most important greenhouse gas. Yet, what the models do, they treat the water cycle as just being there, relegating to a passive agent in the climate system. The energy that is then required to drive water cycle must therefore come from somewhere else. The sun, the sun which drives the water cycle then generates climate, and climate decides how much jungle, how much tundra and so on we will have, and therefore drives around the carbon cycle. This would, this would be the top-down model, that means driving in through the climate. Or it can be the way the IPCC does it. It says no, it's bottom-up being driven. Carbon cycle is putting a bit energy into water cycle, then it generates more activity, then it generates even more and more and more and more activity. It's like saying that it is, Puerto Rico is driving the world economy by positive feedback from the United States, because when they put a bit of, when Puerto Rico increases its GDP by 10%, then what happens is that some of it will come into the US, there will be more economic activity, therefore more finances, more economic activity, more finances, more economic activity, more finances, until you get boom, and then you get a world economic boom. Well, the point is that Puerto Rico is piggybacking on the United States, and is subsidized by the United States, not driving it. Okay? So you have top-down or bottom-up situation. So the energy that is required to drive the water cycle must therefore come either from here, or from any possible way, possible combination of the above. Note that because of the overwhelming importance of water vapor to the greenhouse effect, existing climate models are not diagnostic. To the water cycle, energy is just that, energy, regardless where does it come from. The water cycle doesn't know. It's energy for it, okay? So, as documented by previous speakers, the past climate record does indeed resemble the trend in solar output. However, because the 3 decades of satellite data show only limited solar variability, the solar output would have to be somewhat amplified to explain the magnitude of the centennial warming. The IPCC argues that because no amplifier is known, which is an invalid assertion, man-made greenhouse gases must be responsible for most of the energy imbalance. In other words, they say, they say that this is more or less a constant, sun is a constant, therefore it has to go bottom up. Okay, that's what it says. But this is an assumption, an attribution by default. Okay? Not an actual empirical or experimental proof that carbon dioxide is a driver. Yet, such attribution is then taken in all subsequent complex model calibration of climate as a fact. And this is what is called calibration. If an amplifier to solar output does exist, an empirical observation detailed in the submitted article, which I put up here, argue for its existence, the need to attribute the energy to greenhouse gases would diminish accordingly. Okay? So how realistic is the basic model assumption that the tiny biologically controlled cycle, the carbon cycle, drives the climate via the passively responding huge water cycle? How realistic is it that Puerto Rico is driving the world economy by U.S., pushing around U.S., okay? Our nature tells us that, in fact, it is the other way around. Surely, the blossoming of plants in the spring is the outcome, not the cause of warming sun and abundant rain, okay? So, our atmosphere contains about 730 billion tons of carbon. Each year, about 120 billion tons are cycled via plants on land and about 90 through the oceans. It's absolutely dominant. The human emission account for less than the 5% of annual carbon cycle. Okay?
Less than how much?
5%.
But
From the point of view of interaction of water and carbon cycle, however, it is important to realize that that for every single, we are supposed to plant the trees to lower the CO2, but for every single molecule of CO2 that plant has to transpire into the atmosphere, water from the soil, from the roots, 1,000 molecules of water for every single CO2. So this is a huge amount of energy required to lift the water back into the canopy, from the canopy back into the atmosphere. And the actual reaction is one CO2 for one water to generate the transpiration, to generate the photosynthesis. The rest, actually the entire energy is not needed for this photosynthesis. Practically the entire energy is to drive the water cycle up to the atmosphere, to drive the water conveyor belt. Why is it? Because this is what brings you the food. This is your conveyor belt which is bringing you the food, the nutrients. No food, no life, no carbon cycle. Okay? So, in other words, the required huge energy source is the sun. Solar energy drives the water cycle, generating warmer and wetter climate, and invigorating the biological carbon cycle. The sun also warms the oceans that emit the CO2 into the atmosphere. So atmospheric CO2 is thus a product and not the cause of the climate, as demonstrated by the past records, where temperature changes always precede changes in atmospheric CO2. Ice cores, as Jan was showing you, is the case. The same happened after Pinatubo eruption, at first cooled, and then started CO2 flux exchange, and it happens every spring. It's sun shining first, and then flowers bloom. Okay? So what might be the complementary source of energy that could account for the disputed 1.6 watts? Clouds. Clouds are mirror that reflect solar radiation back into space. The amount of solar energy reflected by the Earth is about 77 watts. And the difference between cloudy and cloudless skies is almost 30 watts. Okay? So change of few percent in cloudiness can easily account for 1.6 watts, what is being disputed. Okay? So clouds are an integral part of the water cycle. But formation of water droplets requires seeding. That's like in Beijing, they had to shoot into the clouds, okay? It requires seeding. Empirical and experimental results suggest that cosmic rays hitting the atmosphere may generate such initial seeds. While the actual mechanism is still debated, the correlation between cloudiness and cosmic rays have been published. Okay? These are measurements. The amplifying connection then to the sun probably comes via its electromagnetic envelope, which is called heliosphere, and a similar envelope around the Earth called the magnetosphere. These act as shields against lethal cosmic rays reaching our planet. A less active sun is not only colder, but its gone, but its heliospheric shield shrinks, and there are more cosmic rays coming through, and they seed more clouds, and they also produce cosmogenic nuclides, the beryllium-10, carbon-14, which we can then measure in trees, rocks, and so on. So this is a measure of the activity of the sun, really. When there is weaker sun, we have more of those cosmogenic nuclides. So cosmic rays, when hitting the atmosphere, if you look at the record for such a record for the past 10,000 years, next slide. So what you see here, this is a record of the blue is a record of climate over the last 10,000 years. And this is the record of carbon-14. This is those cosmic rays which I was talking to, which are due to cosmic rays and which reflect the activity of the sun. If you look, next slide, on the CO2 was flat all the time, and this is the climate at about 280 parts per million, exactly like with the so-called pre-industrial level. So the science of climate change continues to evolve, and regardless of the outcome of the climate debate, observational data suggest that we may be served well by basing our climate agenda scientifically and economically on a broader perspective than that in the IPCC outlined scenarios. Okay? These are one scenario, but there is more to it than just IPCC. Our pollution statement and energy diversification goals can then be formulated and likely implemented with less pain. Thank you.